And I want to welcome you to this month's webinar for the National Chimney Sweep Guild. We really appreciate you tuning us in, and we hope this episode will be one that will provide you value. What's our subject matter this month? Well, it's all about problem solving. You see, that's one of the biggest challenges in business, and one of the things that takes up so much of a manager's time. How do we problem solve? You know, it seems like every single day in the world of business, we continuously have chaos, we have problems, we just have all kinds of things that are going on that robs us of our time, our energy, and prevents us from getting our jobs done. It's just a fact of life. So, what do you need to do? You need to develop a process for problem solving. And that's what Brandy, Cheryl, and myself are going to talk about in this webinar. We hope that it brings value to you. Let us know here at CVC Success Group how we can help you move through your challenges and turn your business into the one that you've dreamed of. Appreciate you joining us, and here's the webinar.
And we see that right off the bat, we have our good friend, Mr. Al Levy, on here watching us today. So, hey, just like he said, he loves problem solving. And a lot of this Al's going to get down to what you do and the specialty that you bring to the table also. So I'm going to start off first. I'm going to take precedent here, and I'm going to talk this morning or this afternoon about a process called the Kaizon meeting, the Kaizon process. And this is a process out of lean training. And lean is something that we work with. I've been a student of lean. I've also recently just wrote a 3-part article in Sweeping Magazine with an interview with Charlie Quayle, who is basically one of the leading experts in the chimney and vending industry when it comes to lean. And Kaizen is a process where you have a problem and you go in and host what's called a Kaizen event in your company. And in the Kaizen event, we get together, we bring the brain trust into it, and we go over what is the problem, and we concentrate on that one thing. We don't get off base, we stay focused, and that's why it's so important to have a good facilitator in a meeting like this, because what often happens, people go off in left field and right field, and all of a sudden you forget even why you're there, and the talk goes sideways and all that, which I'm sure if Brandy's sitting in a meeting like that and that talk goes sideways, I got a feeling it's just going to really bother her. So one of the things I'm going to recommend you do if you want to be able to solve your problems is go and start and look at and research the Kaizen process or Kaizen. I'm not sure. My Japanese isn't real good, but this comes out of Japanese lean processes. So, Brandy, what's your number one idea, your number one hit for problem solving today for managers to look at?
Well, my number one would first be to make sure that you're identifying the correct problem. I think so often as leaders, we think that we know what the problem is, and it's not actually the problem. And I'm just going to give you an example. I was recently on a client site doing a one-day workshop, and they thought that their problem was communication. Makes sense, right? That's number one, what we hear from most of our companies. However, when we dug down into it, their problem was actually accountability that was leading to the communication problems. So we first have to define what the actual problem is.
Okay, so that's drilling down. And Brandy, that kind of brings me to one of your thought processes that you implement with a lot of people is what we call the post-mortem inspection, to where we're actually looking at the problem, but we're going back to cause and we're tracing what's called cause to effect. It's similar to what you do when you look at a problem in a customer's house and we got water leaking in or we got smoke entering the house. And what we've got to do is trace this back to what is the cause of the problem. Would you agree with that?
100%. And yes, 100%.
Yeah, that's it. So Cheryl, what about yours? I've given one, Brandy's given one. What's your idea to share with people today on our broadcast about how to be an effective problem solver?
Well, I'm going to segue right off of Brandy. What you first, like she said, you need to figure out what the problem is and you need to examine it. But then you need to start creating some idea of a solution and be ready for change, because plan A and B usually never work. You'll get down to X, Y, and Z. But then you've got to take one of these and go forward with it and try to make it work. If it doesn't work rapidly, move to the contingency plan. That's the best idea I've got for.
Okay, well, we've got a lot of several comments have come up. One is from our friend Al Levy there, and he said, "My engineering professors," and I didn't know that you were an engineering graduate. Now, Al, I've learned something new about me. Told me that the better you define the problem, the closer you're getting to potential solutions. And another friend of ours has just added, "I like to research, value ROI, act, then review, and adjust if needed." And that's from our buddy Chuck Roydhouse there. And, who is a very in depth thinker who examines a lot in his own business as he went forward. And he's now helping people in their businesses to adjust and to be a problem solver. But see, it's also a matter of, I think that in order to solve the problem, and Al just added something else, never practice, but he has a pretty degree. How about that? We got a degree on Al's wall. Al, you have just stepped up to another whole level. That's kind of like when you became a published author. It just moved you to a whole new level to know that you have an engineering degree today. But it's also a matter of being able to listen and listen to what the problem is. Cheryl, do you think most leaders are good listeners that will enable them to trace back to the problem?
The really funny thing about that, usually the leader that's very strong and very dead set at something is the worst. It's the worst listener out there. The only thing they can do is practice at it. If you're less demanding, you're tempted to listen more. But then will you take that and move it to the next step? So it's kind of flip flops the way it goes. You would think all leaders would be good listeners, but that's something you train yourself to do.
Yeah, and earlier this week I actually did one of my morning video reels, and it was all about how to be what's called an active listener and listening to understand the problem. And I think that's part of the post-mortem thing that you've got to do. You got to be willing to look at yourself and look at the mistakes you've made and and looking back in the history and see what goes on. So we got another one here from Al. Al's added in, "Cheryl, so spot on about leaders need to be better listeners." We had the privilege, actually, Brandy, and you're aware of this, that we had lunch with Al a week ago, Monday, when we were able to stop in Phoenix and have some and meet and have some time with a couple people. And Al was one of them. Very, very great conversation there at a restaurant there. So, Brandy, keep on going with it. What's your thoughts at this point as we move forward?
Do you want like just another one, or you want my whole list?
No, you give me another one, because I know you have done some deep research, and we're going to talk about all of yours because you're the person to do that research. And folks, so you know, when we say research something, that little lady right there, she gets into the research. So go ahead.
So, kind of going back to, and it kind of goes along with research but I call it data mining. So once we identify the problem and we know that that is the true problem, then we need to go and look at all the data surrounding that. One of the things that in nursing that we do when we chart is we use SOAP, SOAP, the acronym SOAP, which stands for Subjective, Objective, Assessment, and Plan. And you can actually use this in problem solving. So, for example, what are the subjectives? So you used the homeowner, the water leak. So the subjective is the homeowner says that there's, water leaking in the chimney. That's what they're saying. That's their perception. That's what they're seeing. What's the objective? Well, we don't have a cap, we don't have flashing, etc. And then assess all of that and come up with an actual plan of action. But if you're doing this in a team setting, you have to have buy-in to that plan. And then I'll save the rest for later.
Okay. Well, go along with what you said.
Okay.
This is from the Kaizon process, okay, which is they recommend creating a problem statement. And these are the questions. What is or isn't occurring, and to what degree? Where in the process or product does it occur? Such in Cheryl's operation at her manufacturing plant, is it between departments? Is it in shipping, packaging, or whatever? Who does the problem affect? When did it occur, and has it occurred before? and how much impact is there, and what is the magnitude in terms of frequency, cost, time, and customer satisfaction. And see, that's why I like the Kaizon process, because it's actually has a system there. And Brandy, that was very similar to what you were just saying and what you were tracking it down. So again, problem solving processes. Cheryl, what's your thoughts on what you just heard?
That's basically where you've got to go with this. I know that as he said, I like the SOAP process. That's very good. But the one thing that I see with the leaders a lot of time, they're not open-minded. And when they go into trying to solve a problem, they want to answer it themselves when their best knowledge might be within their team. And so to me, that's one of the biggest things with problem solving. We can all solve a problem, but we can solve it much better as a team if we keep our minds open and work the process. Because, as Brandy said, without the process, we don't get where we're going.
Okay, so what I just heard you say is many times management is not open minded. Is that what you just said?
That's exactly what I just said. And that's what I see more than not when I'm working with someone. A lot of the leaders become, it's because of me, it's mine, it's my idea, we're going to do it this way. They're not transparent with their idea. They just blow it out, and that's where they try to go. So that's where, to me, leadership needs, along with the listening, they have to learn to really listen.
Right.
And I think that would make the process so much better. But they need to be transparent with what they're thinking so the other people can absorb it and work with it.
Right. And that was one of the things when I listened to the speaker earlier this week, and he was from the EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, and he was talking about active listening. And this is what he said. If you become an active listener, you can actually see the picture that is in the brain of another person whenever they are talking to you. But you've got to be intent on listening. And what you're also saying, Cheryl, if I'm hearing you correct, is you got to look at yourself and what role you may play in this failure. Would that be true?
Yes, very true. And that many times you are the reason for the fall. The ideas are sitting right there in front of you. You're just not willing to take them.
Yeah. So, Brandy, what's your thoughts on this? Or do you have another one you got there that's really good?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of do 5 of them off my list, but go into a story with it. So,
well, here's the whole thing, Brandy. Remember what Scott McCain taught us. One of the best things you can do in order to make your point is to use story in this. So listen carefully to there, because she is composing a story to help you, the listener, get a grasp of what we're talking about, help you put you into feeling this. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you about a failure I had years ago. I was working in the pre-anesthesia clinic. I was job sharing. We had a problem with the way the charts were. They weren't working. They weren't working for anybody. So my job share partner and I came up with a plan. We did a lot of research. We found these charts that we thought were just going to be amazing. Now, we had buy-in from the hospital. We had buy-in from our superiors, which was wonderful. In fact, they spent a pretty penny to buy us these charts. And we didn't fully align our goals, though, or define what our barriers were. And what I mean by that was, yeah, they worked great for us in the pre-anesthesia clinic, but we never showed them to the OR or to post-op or to the surgeons and anesthesia, all the other people that were going to be using these charts. And we didn't have their buy-in. And so it failed. It failed miserably. And so one of the things that I want to get into, and I think if I could say one most important point, this would probably be my most important point out of this entire thing for me, would be ready to fail forward. So we failed at that and cost the hospital a pretty penny, but we failed forward because we learned. We did our strategizing. We had the hospital's buy-in, but we learned that we had to get a whole lot more buy-in and also align our goals with what the goals of the operating room, post-op, et cetera was. So always be ready to fail forward.
Got you covered. So let me bring this to you from a customer standpoint a minute, okay? You recently made a trip. and the vendor of your airplane travel failed you, would that be would that be a true statement?
Yes.
I mean, you felt stranded. When you got disappointed by that airline, does it actually cause you to not want to travel in the future?
I told my husband actually just this morning because he's planning another trip. And I said, I don't want to see a hotel room or an airplane for a while yet. And I actually have to go on another trip in 2 weeks. And that's way too soon because I'm done. I'm terrified. I actually feel like I have like post-traumatic stress disorder from it. Like I'm going to be worrying that this flight that I have coming up is going to get canceled or I'm going to get stuck somewhere.
Yeah, and I understand completely. And I want to welcome people who are watching us today. Our friend Doug Wings on here, our friend Lee Ross on here right now. So appreciate everybody being in there with us today. And like I said, if there's any questions on this, feel free to please put them into there. But Cheryl, she's hitting some definite points here. What's your thought on what she just said?
It's definitely so. I mean, I felt so sorry for Brandy, but the trouble is she couldn't do anything about it. It had to come from the vendor. And that's where you've got to assess it. The only thing she could do is sit back, look at it. And Jeremy, as she told us earlier, was buying other flights. He was trying to find a solution. The problem is with the way the traffic was there was no solution to come across until they feathered everybody out.
Yeah, it was. And again, it makes you wonder, okay, this was a technology breakdown that Southwest Airlines had, came out on social media on Saturday night, probably about the time that y'all were heading to the airport to get your flights, had no idea you were going to be coming back to that hotel later tonight to check back into the same hotel that you've been in all week. But again, do you wonder if Southwest is taking steps right now to solve this problem where it doesn't occur? Or is it like, hey, that's just part of business?
Well, I'm telling myself in my mind that it was like a computer error, like they inputted some coding. And so obviously when you do that, sometimes it can mess up other codes. I don't know that. That's just what I'm telling myself. But at the end of the day, they didn't properly problem solve because they were worried about continuing the flights once they got back up and running, but they hadn't problem solved how they were going to get all the people that had been canceled or delayed home.
Right. So, what kind of confidence? You're a dedicated Southwest customer. Okay. You will get on a Southwest flight. That is your preferred airline. So, how does this change your opinion of whose airplane you may get in for your next travel?
We've already got another credit card with different airline miles lined up.
Yeah. See what Al just said. Southwest, no, they're not working on it, in my opinion. So, you see what's going on. But again, it goes down, and having Al on here, who's one of the leading systems experts that I've ever known in the blue collar industries, it goes down to what we've always said, which is, and this is part of problem solving, and this is what we've taught for years. Is there a system? Is the system wrong? And or did someone not follow the system? So what this follows into, my opinion, whenever we have a problem in business, if we don't have a system in order to address this problem, that means we got to go back to the drawing board, and it's time to add a new system, which is one of the things that I try to tell my clients and explain to them. The altering of systems will never be a completed task. It's going to go on for the rest of your career as a business owner because things change. If you look at it right now in the industry that we all come out of, which is the chimney service industry, there's a really big thing going on related to the real estate market, because now, because of real estate, people are buying homes and they are not requesting inspections. They are foregoing the inspections. And we've seen discussion this week about people not going there. And this is why you can't get settled in. And that's a problem. So if we take that one problem, that the real estate market is falling for the chimney service companies, then what they've got to do is look at a new process, a new market to replace that market. It's kind of like Doug Wing's daddy. How? and how Hal came up with what I'm going to call the better mousetrap when he came up and went to market building the Little Giant ladders. It was a much, much better ladder than anything else on the market. It was also grossly more expensive. And if you read his book, and I'm going to put it up, Doug, I'm going to give you a plug here. If you read his book, Giant Success, which Doug gave me an autographed copy when we met him last week, he was going to send one to Cheryl because he didn't know she was along for the ride that day. But this is what you got to do. And see, this is what, that Al just stated. Such a great point on system and tweeting them versus winging them with no systems or broken systems. Because in my opinion, what you've got to do is you've got to have, if you have a problem, Cheryl, do you agree that we don't want to suffer this same problem over and over and over?
I mean, that's what the whole deal of trying to solve it is, so it doesn't happen again. The problem is most people just let it pass by, and it was a one-time experience. It's not going to happen again. I'm good. And it will happen again. I mean, you have to stay ahead of your game. That's what your systems are for. Get them written out. If you blew it the first time, fix it before it happens again, because I will tell you there'll be another glitch on the airline.
Right.
And everybody will be just like Brandy was. They'll be stuck.
Okay, so Brandy, let me ask you a question. I'm gonna bring this back to your personal experience, okay? Which you got delayed and you were supposed to get home Saturday night. You got home early Tuesday morning, if I remember right. So, we talked before we went on air about the matter of not having enough medications with you. We also talked about the fact of having enough clothes with you. And I even shared that usually I've been stuck before. Usually I'm carrying an extra change of clothes with me, those type of things. But to be honest with you, whenever this occurred to you, I'm on quite a few prescription drugs today. And I wondered, okay, do I need to carry extra of my prescription drugs? And that's part of our personal systems in life. And that's what we develop and what we got to work from here. So Cheryl, what's your next thought on problem solving for business owners and managers?
Well, the one thing that I see happens or doesn't happen, they're never observing. They're not looking for what might happen. They're waiting for the bat to drop. They don't see things. If you keep your eyes open, you know me, I'm always looking at something. If you've got your eyes open, you can see the little progressions of a lot of things happening. Maybe not planes getting grounded, but in our business world, we see the warehouse getting bad. We see the employees not getting together. And it's easier, like you say, because I know somewhere in this program you're going to say it, Barney Fife, nip it in the butt. So I just figure I'll go ahead and get that out of the way and we won't have to do it again. But that's what a lot of leaders don't do. They wait till it gets so bad before they do anything about it.
Yeah, so you don't like my Barney Fife reference.
I have lived with that for a long time.
Got you covered. But it was kind of like this week. And I had a client that called me up earlier in this week. And he said, Jerry, something's bad's happening. I said, what's going on? He said, our leads have dropped dramatically over the last month. And then I asked him, I said, well, did you not see this coming? And he said, no, I wasn't looking at the tracking because what was happening was I was keyed onto something else, which isn't normal for him to be doing that. He is a numbers tracking guy. And we got Chuck Wardhouse on here, and that's a guy that I know used to sit down and track those things continuously to see what was going on in his own business. So, Brandy, we had Cheryl's thoughts. What's your next one? And you got a good story to go with this?
I hope so. So one of the things that I would say is we're so guilty of not utilizing our mentors and our network. This is where I think like group coaching comes in so helpful. And as I say, like to our clients all the time, you're not special. I'm not special. Nobody's special. If you're having this problem, chances are somebody else has had that problem and they might have already fixed it, figured out how to solve it, and could have a great idea for you. So make sure that you're utilizing your network, your mentors, your group coaching anytime problems do come up. And then also, we just all got back from the National Chimney Sweep Guild convention. We got a lot of knowledge there, and a lot of people don't realize, but just sitting in that class, you may be solving a problem that hasn't even happened to you yet. So make sure that you're continuing your education. And then I would also say, don't be afraid to write it down. And so I made a little drawing while you guys were talking. That's what I was doing when I was looking down at the paper. But mind map it. So, our flight got canceled. So, well, we could do Amtrak. We could do another airline. We could do standby. We could rebook. We could drive it. But then what are those barriers? Well, Amtrak only has a late night flight and it takes 15 hours. The drive is over 20 hours. And just actually putting it all down on paper, because when you're able to look at it a lot of times, you'll solve it a lot faster.
And Randy, I'm glad you brought that up, because right over here, if you look, sitting to my right, a couple weeks ago, all of a sudden it occurred to me, I've got to get a seminar ready for that convention. And it was about how to utilize virtual online training.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know, I know a lot about virtual training. We've really invested heavily into this. But in order to do that was the mind mapping process. Cheryl, this is an area that you have a lot of experience with it. So is mind mapping going to help a person get to that solution they're needing to have?
It will. The thing about it is, when you're actively thinking, you're just piling thoughts on top of thoughts, and eventually you lose the first thought, it goes away. So if you will literally put it on paper and mind map it out, by the time I mind map point to point, sometimes I start, I take it out, and I bring my solution back into the bottom. Is that where you took it, Brandy? And then the thing about it is, you can see your progression. And to be honest, if it doesn't work, then you can go back to the mind map and see where you made that glitch. Because some things look pretty on paper, they don't come out realistic in life. But I call it a mind dump. It just clears your mind up. And I've noticed a lot of times when I did a mind map and got everything off my mind, the next thought was the answer to the question I was looking for. It was hid somewhere in the brain and just couldn't come out.
Yeah. And Cheryl, that's actually the basis of what we do as coaches. One time I was asked a question, why do you label yourself as a coach and not a consultant? Well, the whole thing is, our job as coaches is not to give you the answer. That's a consultant that gives that answer. What coaches do is we work with the client, because deep down inside, and Brandy, I'm going to ask you if you agree with this, I think that the client actually knows the answer deep down inside. We've got to bring it out of the client where they can derive that. Otherwise, we become a mental crutch for that person. Does that make sense to you, Brandy?
You're describing the past 2 days of my life.
The past 2 days of your life, right? It's just like right now. Each of you have had some hiring disappointments, okay? Where you've actually both have recruited very good applicants that then caved in or didn't take the job, whatever, but you had a great applicant that just fell through. So from that, Cheryl, let me start with you. Since your applicant fell through that looked very good, what would you do to solve that problem in the future? And Brandy, look at Al's comment right there. So, Cheryl, what would be your idea of solving that problem?
Well, the main thing, mine fell through because her present employer, when she turned in her notice, upped her salary to do it. You need to find out where that fine line is. I mean, this would have been the perfect job for her. Everyone was agreed on it. She had already taken the position and had a start date. And when she turned in her 2 weeks notice, they offered her more money. I may have gone back to her at that point and been really nice and say, can I meet that dollar?
Okay. Brandy, what about you? You were telling us about a failure, and actually you're going to be working all weekend doing interviews because of this. Was there anything that you would have come out to solve this particular problem.
Yeah, my situation was extremely similar to Cheryl's. Mine was a client outside of our industry, and this person was actually supposed to start on Tuesday, and we were just notified that that wasn't going to happen. So what I did is I actually went back to my interview questions that I used for this client, and my last question now reads, if you were offered the position, went to turn in your 2 weeks notice, and they incentivized you to stay, would you?
That's a good one. Cheryl, what you think of that?
I like that. Can I borrow that one from
Hey,
you?
you can, hey, we trade this stuff around, okay? This is what makes our team so good. I honestly feel like is we share the processes of what we each learn. We have a lot of communication between us all the time of what we're learning in different areas, okay? It was like I felt so good today, Brandy, because one of our clients actually started doing screen recordings after working on this. And when he sent me this, like, Lord of mercy, we have finally got, but it's an ongoing process. But again, what you've got to do is look deeply inside yourself. So Brandy, what else have you got down on your list of tricks and tactics there today?
I think one of the last things that I had was just make sure that you're tracking, and Chuck touched on this a little bit with his comment earlier, but tracking using metrics and data. So we may think we've solved the problem, but again, our perceptions tend to get in the way. So what is the data showing us? Is the data showing us that we've solved the problem? And again, if it's not, that's okay. Don't be afraid to learn from that, fail forward, and go back to, like what Cheryl said, go back to your mind map and see what else you came up with.
Right. And that's one of the things, that's what we refer to as tracking and measuring the success, what was there. A lot of times that information is there. It just hasn't caught our attention. It's kind of like waste. When we start tracking waste, I've often had it told to me when I do an analysis, a company will say, hey, we don't have a waste issue. Okay, that's great. But then I spend a day in the company, and at the end of that day, I ask the question, are you sure you don't have waste? We get used to these things because usually we're not going to move on a problem unless it causes us pain. Cheryl, what's your thoughts on that? Does it require pain to actually come up and do the problem solving?
Yeah, because it's a time thing. It's a thing we don't have. We don't have any more of than what we've got. It's a personal embarrassment if something's gone wrong. It's hard not to take it personal. I mean, her not taking the job, I didn't take her not taking it personal. I took the fact that I didn't catch it as personal. So it's that kind of leads to my next thought is learn from what you've done and back up that we've added questions. When I started interviewing, I could pop an interview out in 10 minutes online. I couldn't do a face-to-face like that. But it grows and it grew again today. It'll grow again next week. So that's, as leaders, that's what we've got to learn. And you can never quit learning. And that's where leaders stalemate. A lot of times they want their employees or subordinates to learn, but they forget that it's a higher process for them to stay at it and keep their eyes and their ears open and learn from the mistakes and also learn from the achievements. A lot of times we don't learn from our achievements because it went right. Keep that in your mental thing so when it comes again, you know the path to take without going back to the mind map.
Yep. And I think Al just hit it there, which is I think a lot of people wear blinders. They're not keyed on what's the problems are because maybe they can absorb it. A lot of times people can absorb things. I mean, it was like Brandy. One of the solutions that Jeremy had was, let me buy a whole lot of airplanes. I mean, you probably got airline tickets that you will never use today because that man was determined to get you home. And would you say he probably wasn't clear thinking at that point?
Well, we have points, so it's a little bit different because then we can just turn him back in and get our points back. He was just doing everything in his power because his wife was breaking down.
Well, it was not a pretty sight, I'm imagining, in the Las Vegas airport this week.
I knew it was out of my control. However, after being gone for a week as a person that doesn't like to travel anyway, and being away from my kids and being exhausted and just wanting to get back to my routine, it was not a pretty sight.
That's what I mean. And adding a control freak on top of this
Yes.
into it, it's like this plane needs to move, it really needs to move. So, Cheryl, you got any more ideas for problem solving?
One of the things that I think is important is to improve the workflow. And that can be in your office, that can be in your warehouse, that can be anywhere you're doing on the top of your desk. We all tend to live a cluttered life. And when it's cluttered, we can't make the improvements and the thoughts that it needs to take us to the next step. So I think just keeping your eyes open and keep an eye on the workflow. Make sure you know what's going on. That's a form, the tracking falls right in there. That's a form of workflow. But I think that's one of the important things that we all need to realize. And you can't keep it all in your mind either. Put it on paper, put it where you can read it, put it where you can keep it up. Make your own SOP. Believe me, I have notes that almost tell me how to make notes some days.
So that was going to be my next question. Part of being able to problem solve is to calm yourself down. When you're excited, when you're passionate, your mind doesn't work well. It doesn't. And it may be a factor of this is not something that you do today. This may be something you don't put it off indefinitely, but you think about it, but you plan for this. So I'm going to go back to the Kaizon process because there's a lot here. And one of the parts is the preparation. The most critical stage of any Kaizen event is the preparation. Yet, properly defining the problem, the goal, and the scope can be very challenging. And that's going to go back to what Brandy said about accumulating and collecting the data. Try this simple but effective approach. First, team leaders should ask the following: what is the purpose of our Kaizen event? What process or value stream will be targeted? What are the desired outcome? And who should be on the team who has the most expertise to come up with this explanation? I can only imagine having somebody like Al to call in and say, Al, we've got a system breakdown. This is not happening. Now, we also know Al's got his systems because, hey, when you call him in, he wants your undivided attention, right, Cheryl? From what we heard, hey, when you got Al in your office, Al gets your attention. I learned that from him last week in Phoenix. Did you hear that one good?
Don't answer your phone when you're with Al because Al will leave.
Even if you are Tommy Mello, right?
Even if you're Tommy Mello.
He's there to help you solve that problem. And so I understand that very, very completely. But you got to plan this out. And like I said, you got to have a cool head. I don't think that when you are passionate and under pressure that you can solve that problem. And Al just threw up some emojis here. There you go. So Al just gave us a thumbs up and sunglasses for a cool look. Okay. Now, Mr. Royhouse just said, leaders understand in today's fast-paced world, you must constantly monitor and adjust accordingly. Understanding training is constant and an investment to survive and move forward. Change your mindset that this is the cost of doing business, just like insurance, rent, cost of goods sold, and other things. And see, the other thing is when you're dealing with a problem, people have to be willing to accept that to accept that solution. You know, it was an amazing thing. I had clients in my class that I presented last week that had heard the same things I had said before, but they were willing to accept it after they heard it in that seminar. So also, you've got to be ready and willing to accept the changes in life that it's going to take to make the change in you. So, Cheryl, anything else you got to add into today's subject matter?
The main thing, again, keep your eyes open, your ears open, and face it head on. Don't keep putting it off. That's where the problems grow. Like you say, you don't have to do it right then, but face it head on when the time's there. because a lot of us kind of shim around to the right and around to the left, and before you know it, your problem's out of hand. And so make sure that you're aware of it, but speak it with your team and listen to what they've got to say again, because they're some of your greatest resource.
Right. So, Brandy, what's your thoughts? Anything else you would add in?
Yeah, just going back to what Cheryl was talking about, our hiring failures, like I did take it personally. And so then I had to calm myself down because I was ready to cry this morning. I told Jeremy because I just felt so bad for the client. They're heading right into their busy season. Their busy season started this past week. And so now we have to start over with this position. But so I went and did my research just because I needed to make myself feel better. And this is one of the hiring trends that's going on right now. There are a lot of people out there that are actually purposely interviewing for jobs with no real intention of leaving their job, but they know that their employer is going to save them. So they just want to be able to say, hey, I got an offer over here, because they know their employer is going to match it.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd be like, well, good luck to you. But, and so the other thing is prioritize. And so what I mean by that is, we all know I'm like big on prioritizing, and I write everything down on a notebook. And so I came in this morning with a whole list of priorities. However, when I got this email that this lady was not going to be starting next week, all these priorities had to go by the wayside, and I had to prioritize this client and hiring for them. And then also delegate. And I think this is where, again, as leaders, we fail a lot. We are just naturally control freaks as leaders, and we think that we can do it better. I'm going to throw my husband under the bus just today. My CSR and I had a question about some BTUs. We took it to our director of operations to have him take a second look and ask. But it just so happened that my husband was standing there, and he felt the need to control and insert himself into the conversation.
Not Jeremy.
And he didn't need to. We all had it under control, but that's the control part of it. And again, I think a lot of us leaders are like that. So don't be afraid to delegate. I would have not survived these last 2 weeks if it weren't for my assistant and being able to delegate a whole lot to her. And she's great because she sits over there and just kind of listens to me talking, and she has things on my calendar before I even tell her, because she's just listening to what I'm saying. And so don't be afraid to give up that control. It'll be okay.
That's it. So there's an old song from the 60s, Brandy, and it's actually untrue. And the song was Big Girls Don't Cry. Actually,
I like the song Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, I think from the 70s.
Okay, so Brandy, you're a fine girl, and big girls do cry, and big boys do cry, and sometimes that's what happens. It does take you to tears. So anyway, we hope this has helped you and given you some ideas. Like I said, you've heard some concepts. I highly encourage you to look into lean processes, the Kaizon or Kaizen process, however it's pronounced. My Japanese is not real good.